Hey guys, my name is Dal McGill. I'm one of your Cobra torch dealers. I'm getting ready to show you one of the most unique portable welding and cutting torches on the market. Been out for just a little over 30 years. You can weld every metal but titanium from 4/1000s to 3/8, cut thin metal, cut up to 1-inch plate. You have a lifetime warranty of 50 to 70% gas savings. Why spend $3,000 to $5,000 for a very nice TIG and a plasma cutter when we can show you with our torch we can do just about all that for less than $400. Now we're going to get ready to show you some of the welding and cutting with it. Now all of your welding is just on 4 pounds of oxyacetylene, so you're completely portable. Now I'm using my smallest tip. I'll go through all that at the end of the demonstration. But you can see with our gun right here, the flame pressure is 80% softer, extremely concentrated. There's no excess oxygen. There's a shield around that weld puddle, so you'll actually get a weld just as nice as any TIG or Heliarc on the market. And you can weld thin metal, which I'm getting ready to weld some thin aluminum right here for you. So we can go from 4/1000s up to 3/8. I'm using 4043 aluminum TIG rod. You can also use 1100 on your car bodies. Now we must use a high heat flux to break up the oxide layer on top of the aluminum. Aluminum basically melts a little over 1200 degrees, the oxide layer a little bit thicker. So you have to put a flux on to break up the oxide layer. Now we also have to use a special glass for the aluminum to knock the flux glare out. Now all you want to do is actually take that little cone right there. The longer that cone, the hotter it is. The smaller, the cooler. So we got a small flame. If it's a large piece of aluminum or thick, you have to go in and preheat it. Aluminum's bad about dissipating the heat. Now get both hands very comfortable. Take that little cone down, and you want the aluminum to start to melt, which it's more of a wrinkling. So we get it to a molten state and then push the rod in the puddle. The less you move the torch, the closer you keep that little cone right there to the metal. Actually, the easier and the more control you have on it. So you don't want to pick it up and move it around a good bit. Now notice I'm just using a little dip in, dip out action. All right, now the first thing that you notice, you get very little metal movement. You get 100% penetration. I'm just going to cool it off. You get a very nice weld. That weld is as strong as any weld on the market. You can hammer weld, shape, form, and move that metal. You can actually bend it double, so the guys that do a lot of restoration work, especially in a lot of these new cars and trucks with all the aluminum in it, so you can hammer weld that. When you do, like with a regular TIG or MIG, you make that metal hard, you can't do that with. Now you can go from 4/1000s thin, which is 2 pop cans, all the way up to 3/8 thick. Now a lot of you guys that do a lot of restoration work, here's some thin sheet metal. This is about 20 gauge. Now if you give yourself about a 1/16 to 1/8 gap, I'm just going to use a copper coated mild steel rod. A lot of you guys that work with a lot of high strength steel, that real thin stuff, you can go to your 023 MIG wire or 035 and it does a super job. You actually put less heat in it. Now we're running on just 4 pounds of oxyacetylene. Now steel has a little higher melting temperature, a little over 2000 degrees. So I'm going to make that cone right there just a little bit longer. I'm actually going to show you just a little easier way to weld with it. Instead of heating the metal and dipping the rod in and out. All right, so we'll tack it on the end right here. Now you can actually lay the rod right down on top of the metal. We take that little cone, just sort of walk up the rod, wash it right back in the puddle. Now you can weld like this on all your thin metals. It's a very simple, very easy way to do, especially if you guys are just getting started. So always make sure that that puddle is melting and spreading out. So we're just walking up the rod, washing it right back in the puddle. It don't make a difference how dirty, rusty, oily, or greasy that metal is. Even the aluminum we just welded, you can weld dirty aluminum with it. It's the only gun I know you can do that with. All right, your thin metal, you get very little metal movement. Notice how nice a weld. You get that 100% penetration. That's the strongest weld on the market. Now again, you can see you can bend it. It don't go anywhere. If you want to come back, shape, form, and move that metal, you can move it around all you want without hardly any metal movement at all with it. So if you're doing that thin metal, very little metal distortion, what little you get, you can hammer weld it, which means you don't have to put a lot of body filler in it, maybe just a little bit of glazing compound, and that'd be it. Now we can do the thin steel, the aluminum, you can do stainless steel with it. This right here is a couple thin pieces of stainless. This is some 304. Now even on the stainless, I try and give myself just a little bit of a gap. I've got a 308 stainless steel TIG rod. Remember, the thinner the metal, the thinner the rod you use right here. All right, steel, every metal but stainless, I use a neutral flame. Here on the stainless, we're going to use a carburizing flame. All that means is just a flame that runs out past that little cone, which is an acetylene-rich flame to make sure no oxygen gets in that weld puddle. Now, even on that stainless here, guys, you can actually take, and you know, we're welding with that little inner cone right there. So you just want to keep all the heat on the rod. It's sort of like brazing, except it's a whole lot easier. You're getting 100% penetration on it. And again, you can go from 4 thousandths thin all the way up to about 3/8 on that stainless. Now you're going to get a dark looking weld when you weld with it because of the excess acetylene. You can see your weld, your 100% penetration on it, the stainless. Now see, you get a dark looking weld with it. Jeweler's rouge and a buffing wheel will buff it out just like a mirror, so it cleans up very, very nice. All right, now you can not only weld with this gun, but with the same gun, you can also cut with it. Now you can do cast iron. It does a beautiful job on cast. You can do all your thicker metals. Now we have two different cutting attachments. Now this right here is what we call the undercutter. We use a 2-tip configuration. Take your little male plug out. All right, now this right here is the cutting tip. We're going to heat with the top tip. I'm actually putting what I call my 0.5, we'll go over all that, on top to heat with. Then your cutting tip on the bottom. Where a regular torch has all that heat going into the metal, we have a separate heating and a separate cutting tip. So we'll get some thin sheet metal right here. Something out of the way here for it. You just get a little smaller piece here. Something to hold that little piece of steel. All right, now we're going to cut just some 20 gauge steel. Now you're still on just 4 pounds of oxyacetylene. All your welding is just on 4 pounds. So that 50 to 70% gas savings is very nice. All right, you heat with the top tip. Remember, a thin piece of metal, you don't need a very long flame. You heat with that top tip. Now as soon as that metal turns red, pull the trigger. Nothing but oxygen comes out the bottom. Now once I heat that metal, once it turns red, pull the trigger. Once I pull the trigger and start cutting, all I watch is that bottom tip. I'm going to take that bottom tip and lay it right down on the metal. You won't hurt that tip at all because you're not generating enough heat. So just wait for it to turn red. So all I'm watching is the bottom tip. Once I pull the trigger, I pay no attention to that flame. Now guys, I love a plasma cutter. They are very, very nice. Notice how thin that cut is. Hardly any slag at all on the back side. That's a very smooth, very, very thin, very fine cut with hardly any metal movement. You have to get a plasma cutter. You got to have electricity. Then you got to get compressed air. You got to have a dryer. Several $1,000s to try and make a cut like that. That cuts that thin metal as nice as anything on the market. I'm going to cut some 1/2-inch plate. Now we can cut all the way up to 1-inch plate right here. A plasma cutter to cut 1-inch steel, you're going to spend about $5 grand. Plus the electricity, the compressed air. Again, we're just trying to show you guys a very inexpensive way to do some extremely nice welding and cutting. All with the same unit. The gun actually has a lifetime warranty on it. No O-rings, there's no seals. All right, now this is the overcutter. I know that one might look a little stranger than the other one, but usually around a 1/4 inch, 3/16, 1/4 inch, all the way up to 1-inch plate, you're going to pull with it. So your copper tip, we put our number 2 tips, got 2 rings on it, you're going to heat with. And always make sure that these tips are lined up. The wrench should always slide right between it. All right, the cutting tip is on top. I'm going to keep it straight up and down, right down within 1/8 of an inch of that metal. I'm going to bump the oxygen only up to about 15 pounds right here. So we come over, bump the oxygen up just a little bit. All right, now when you're cutting thick metal, you have to preheat that metal. You have to get it good and warm before you cut. All right, so we'll come in and warm that metal up. If you'll always preheat that metal, you get a much nicer cut. Now you can cut faster, cleaner, a very efficient cut on very little oxygen and acetylene. All right, now wait for that metal to turn red. Now once that metal turns red right here, notice how nice and quick, very little slag, a very nice clean cut. Now sometimes you come out just a little bit long. Now notice just how thin. Even a plasma cutter won't cut that thin or that fine, just to show you the versatility. Again, that slag cleans right off. Notice how nice and clean and just how precise, just how close together you can cut without any of that melting back together. You can go any direction. Cut much faster, much cleaner. Cuts your gas consumption in half. Look how quick it cleans up, just how nice and clean and precise that you can cut with. Now everything that comes with our gun right here, real nice black neoprene carrying case, keep everything in it. Now the gun's been out just a little over 30 years, has a lifetime warranty on it. There's no O-rings, there's no seals. It is totally made in the USA. All the parts manufactured, put together. We hardly ever have any trouble with that gun. You can use it 5-7 days a week, 8-10 hours a day. Now when you go to weld, whether you're just getting started with your welding or you're an expert, watch the video, read the book. The video is going to show you guys that are just getting started how to do all your welding, all your cutting. Now the first part of the book is in English, the last part is in Spanish. You can get a hold of the home office. If you have any questions, you can also get a hold of your closest dealer. Now we tell you to read the book, watch the video, practice. We show you what rods, what flux to use, how to set it up, what tips to weld with. When you go to cut, we give you all the pressures. We tell you which way to go. You can't mess up if you read the book, watch the video, and practice. Now the undercutter is the one we pushed on that thin metal. The overcutter is the one we pulled. All right, now this is a cutting guide. Put that on, gives you a nice steady hand if you got a shaky hand. If you need the bevel or miter, you can get a much nicer, more precise cut, whether you're pushing or pulling, thin or thick metal. Now all of these tips, there's